All right. Standard economic theory assumes that buyers and sellers have good information about what they're trading. But in many markets, one side knows more than the other. That difference is called asymmetric information. So, in the article that we're discussing in this lecture, Akerloff's question was, what happens when sellers know more about the quality of a product and buyers can't easily observe it? His answer was the markets may perform poorly or even collapse. This happens through a process called adverse selection. So Akerlof uses the example of the used car market. In his example, there are two types of cars, high quality, which he calls peaches, and low quality cars, lemons. So in this work, the key assumption is that sellers know the quality of the car, but buyers cannot perfectly observe the quality before purchasing. It's difficult for them to tell. Because buyers cannot distinguish between the good and the bad cars, they'll only pay a price based on the average expected quality. So suppose that the good car value is $10,000 and the lemon value is $4,000. If buyers think half the cars are lemons, the expected value is about 7,000 in between those two. But the sellers of good cars aren't going to want to sell for $7,000, so they end up leaving the market. They're unwilling to sell. Now, once the good cars start to leave the market, the average quality drops even further. Prices fall again, and eventually the market can unravel, leaving only lemons in the market. Now, let's move to labor markets and apply this to something we're talking about in this class. Employers face a very similar problem to the used car market. Before hiring a worker, firms cannot perfectly observe things about the worker, like intelligence, their work ethic, what kind of productivity they're going to have on the job, or even their reliability. Workers, however, know a lot more about their own ability than the firms do. So the labor market also has an information asymmetry problem, this one that favors workers. Suppose that we split the workers into two types. We have high productivity workers and low productivity workers. And we assume all high productivity ones are the same and all low productivity workers are the same. Firms cannot distinguish workers from high quality or high productivity and low productivity before hiring them. It's only after hiring them that their productivity level is revealed. In this case, what happens? Firms may offer a wage based on the average expected productivity. So just like in the used car example. So here, high productivity workers may produce $100 an hour, and low productivity workers may produce $40 an hour. But if firms can't distinguish between the two, they may just offer everyone $70 an hour, right in the middle between those. But doing this creates a serious problem for the firm. High productivity workers who are more valuable than they're being paid may feel underpaid relative to their productivity. If they're able to find a job that's willing to pay them more, they'll be more than happy to leave, or they'll leave the job market entirely. This is where credentials and education come into the picture, because if they can signal their quality somehow, they can earn higher wages and be paid closer to their productivity or their productivity. So we're going to talk about Michael Spence later, but building on Akerlof's work, Spence developed the theory of labor market signaling. So the key idea here is that education may serve not only to build skills for the worker and develop their human capital, but also to signal worker availability, or excuse me, ability to employers. Now, employers can't directly observe the worker's ability, but they can observe things like college degrees, their GPA in college, any professional certifications, and things like occupational licenses. And firms can use those to determine if the worker is high productivity or low productivity. If it's easier for high ability workers to obtain these credentials, then education becomes a signal, and it can be really useful to show employers that you are high productivity or high ability. Employers can rely on these degrees to infer worker quality. So, for example, a job posting might require things like a bachelor's degree, a certain certification in that very specific area, and maybe even specific credentials. These requirements help firms screen applicants when the ability to observe the true quality is difficult for firms. This framework helps explain many real-world institutions we see in labor markets. So things like occupational licensing, where licensing laws can signal that workers meet certain standards and are of a minimum level of quality. We can also explain professional certification, where these credentials help reduce uncertainty about how skilled the worker is. And also educational degrees being used as requirements for jobs, where degrees help employers sort workers when productivity is difficult to observe. But all of these things have downsides. So they may raise barriers to entry, increase income inequality, restrict labor supply, or just make it a lot more difficult for workers to start out if you need to get a 4-year bachelor's degree and go into debt for that, just to signal that you're going to be good on the job. This is why economists debate whether some credentials reflect real productivity gains or simply just signaling. Because if they are just signaling and they're really expensive, that can be very costly for the people involved in that. And you can find less expensive ways to do it that still signals the real quality that can make everyone better off. Now, the key insight from Akerlof's paper is that when buyers cannot observe quality, markets can produce inefficient outcomes. In labor markets, we rely on things like credentials and signals, and they emerge as a way to reduce this information asymmetry and allow labor markets to function effectively. But they can also reshape the structure of the labor market itself.